That corn chip smell coming off your dog's paws is not dirt. It is yeast multiplying by the hour, and it gets worse every time you give him another bath to fix it. That smell you keep catching when he curls up next to you on the couch, the one you tried 3 different shampoos on, is coming from somewhere your nose can't actually reach. In my clinic, this is one of the things I get asked about almost every week, and once you know where it really comes from, the fix takes about 60 seconds. I've treated dogs for more than 20 years, and I've watched this exact routine change how a dog smells in a matter of days. Before we get into it, tell me in the comments your dog's name and how old they are, since some of what changes here depends on that. If you've been washing him more often lately and he still smells the same or worse, that's not you failing at something. Bathing more is the instinct almost every owner reaches for, because with people, smell usually does mean dirt. You are not a bad pet parent for not knowing this works differently on a dog. The fact that you noticed the smell and went looking for the actual reason instead of just reaching for a scented spray already tells me you're paying closer attention to your dog than most. Here's the part that surprises people most. Washing him more is often what's making it worse. Every bath strips a thin layer of natural oil off the skin, and that oil is what normally keeps yeast and bacteria in check. Strip it too often, the way overwashing a car strips the wax, and whatever's underneath gets exposed faster than before. So the smell isn't a sign you need to scrub harder. It's a sign something under the coat is out of balance, and scrubbing harder just clears the way for it to come back stronger. In my clinic, this is the single most common misunderstanding I run into with the smell, and it's an easy one to walk back once you see what's actually happening underneath the fur. Every dog's skin carries a small population of yeast and bacteria all the time. That's normal. The one that matters most here has a name, Malassezia, a yeast that lives quietly on the skin in small numbers without causing any trouble at all. Think of a healthy skin barrier as a screen door. It lets a little through, but keeps the numbers low enough that nothing builds up. A damaged barrier is that same screen door full of holes, and yeast and bacteria start multiplying past what the skin can keep in check. What damages that barrier is rarely one single thing. It can be allergies, it can be moisture trapped between the paw pads or in a skin fold, and it can be a gut that's out of balance underneath it all. That last one surprises most owners. The bacteria living in a dog's gut, what I'd call the gut microbiome, doesn't just handle digestion, it also influences how much oil the skin produces. When that balance shifts, the smell can start in the bowl weeks before it ever shows up in the coat. The ears and the anal glands run a smaller version of the same story. Trapped moisture in the ear canal, or fluid that isn't emptying the way it should near the tail, becomes its own breeding ground. Different locations, same underlying pattern. I think of the gut and the skin like plumbing in the same house. Whatever goes wrong in the pipes downstream, in this case the gut, eventually shows up in the fixtures upstream, the skin and the coat. So treating only what you can see and smell on the outside is a bit like mopping up water from a leaky pipe without ever checking the pipe itself. It buys you a day or two before the same puddle comes back. A little bit of doggy smell after a walk or after he's been out in the yard is completely normal. That's just a dog being a dog, and it doesn't mean anything is wrong. What's different is a musty smell that reminds you of corn chips, concentrated right on the paws or tucked into the armpits and neck folds. That specific smell is the yeast on the skin multiplying past its normal number, and it's worth starting the fix on today rather than waiting to see if it fades. Then there's the smell that seems to come from under the tail, sharp and a little fishy, especially if you've noticed him scooting across the floor or turning to lick that spot more than usual. That points to the anal glands, 2 small scent glands near the tail base that normally empty a little with every bowel movement, like squeezing a tube of paint. Firm, regular stools tend to press on them naturally as he goes, which is part of why fiber in the diet sometimes gets recommended alongside everything else here. When the opening narrows or stools run soft for a stretch and they don't empty the way they should, that fluid builds up and the smell gets stronger. Most dogs never need them manually expressed at all if digestion stays steady, but if there's any swelling or he seems uncomfortable sitting, that one moves from a home fix problem to a vet visit. A sour, yeasty smell coming specifically from the ears, paired with head shaking or him pawing at the side of his face, is worth checking closely. Look inside the ear if he'll let you. Redness or a dark, waxy discharge means this has crossed from something you manage at home into something a vet needs to look at directly. Sometimes there's no single spot at all. The whole dog just smells, and it comes back within a day or two of a bath, no matter how thoroughly you scrub. That one usually traces back to the gut-skin connection I mentioned. and it's the one most owners miss entirely because there's nothing specific to point to. A dog licking his paws now and then, especially after a walk through wet grass, is completely normal grooming. What's different is a dog who goes back to the same paw over and over until the fur around it looks damp or stained a rust color from the licking itself. That's not a habit. That's him treating an itch he can't reach any other way. And it usually lines up with the same yeast that's causing the smell. Dogs with heavier skin folds, like bulldogs or pugs, and dogs that spend a lot of time in humid climates, in the South especially, tend to run into this more often simply because moisture sits against the skin longer. If any of what I just described sounds exactly like your dog, you're clearly the kind of owner who pays attention. And that's exactly why I genuinely appreciate you subscribing and hitting like on this one. It helps this information reach more dogs whose owners haven't figured out yet that the smell isn't their fault. Left on its own, none of this stays small. A patch of yeast on the paws tends to spread into bigger patches across the coat, with more itching and more hair thinning as it goes. An ear that keeps building up yeast can thicken the tissue inside the canal over time, which makes every infection after that one a little harder to clear. Anal glands that stay full can become impacted, and in some cases infected or even abscessed, which is painful for him and usually means a procedure at the vet rather than anything you can manage from the kitchen. And a paw he keeps licking to deal with the itch can go from irritated to raw, which opens the door to a secondary bacterial infection on top of the yeast that started it. It doesn't have to get anywhere close to that point. Ear infections tied to this same yeast are among the most common reasons dogs get brought into a clinic at all. And anal gland issues show up more in smaller and toy breeds, though any size dog can develop them. I had a beagle mix in a while back, 6 years old, named Bella. Her owners were convinced they just weren't bathing her enough, so she was getting washed 2 or 3 times a week with whatever shampoo smelled strongest at the store. And the corn chip smell on her paws was strong enough to notice from across the exam room. We swapped the plan entirely. The baths dropped down to once every couple of weeks, a dry baking soda rub went in twice a week instead, and a probiotic went into her bowl every morning. Within about 3 weeks, the smell was noticeably down, and her coat had stopped looking greasy along the way too. Here's the 60-second version, the one you can do tonight. Take plain baking soda, nothing scented, nothing marketed as a pet product, and rub it dry into the fur, working it down to the skin rather than just leaving it sitting on top of the coat. A teaspoon is enough for a small dog, a tablespoon for a medium dog, and closer to 2 tablespoons for a large breed. Focus it where the smell is strongest, the paws, the armpits, any skin fold, rather than dusting the whole body evenly. Let it sit for 2 or 3 minutes, then brush it out thoroughly with a regular slicker brush, since any powder left sitting in the coat will just get licked off and swallowed. Think of it less like a shampoo and more like a sponge. It doesn't cover the smell with a new scent. It actually absorbs the odor molecules the same way a sponge pulls up a spill. Do this once or twice a week, not daily, since using it every day dries out the skin and can end up working against you. For the paws specifically, or any skin folds that seem to hold the smell, a diluted apple cider vinegar rinse works well alongside the baking soda. Mix 1 part vinegar to 3 or 4 parts water. Apply it with a soft cloth rather than pouring it straight on, and let it air dry without rinsing it back off. Use this 2 or 3 times a week. And this is the one safety note I want you to actually remember. Never put vinegar, even diluted like this, on skin that's raw, cracked, or already bleeding. It stings and it slows down healing instead of helping. If a spot looks raw when you check it, that one's for the vet, not the rinse. Now here's the part that actually stops the smell from coming back. And it's the piece almost every owner skips because it isn't something you rub on the coat at all. Remember how the smell can start in the gut before it ever reaches the skin? That's where a plain, dog-specific probiotic added to the bowl once a day comes in, alongside a fish oil omega-3 supplement dosed to the label for his weight. Look for one made for dogs specifically rather than a human probiotic capsule, and go with fish oil over flaxseed, since dogs don't convert plant-based omega-3s nearly as efficiently. The probiotic works on rebalancing the gut side of things over 2 to 4 weeks, and the omega-3 supports the skin's oil barrier on roughly that same timeline. Neither one works overnight, and that's exactly why most owners never connect them to the smell at all. They're looking for something faster. The topical fix handles what you smell right now. This is the piece that decides whether the smell shows back up next month. A quick word on what not to do. Skip anything marketed as a natural deodorizer that lists essential oils on the label at full strength. A lot of them aren't safe for dogs, even though they're sold right next to the pet shampoos. Skip human shampoo, dish soap, and anything bleach based on its coat entirely. And if the smell is really coming from the ears or the anal glands rather than the coat, the baking soda and vinegar will manage the surface smell, but they won't clear an actual infection or an impacted gland underneath it. That needs a vet visit, sometimes with medication, and no home routine replaces that. Climate changes how often you'll need this too. In the humid stretches of summer, especially down south where the air barely dries out between walks, lean toward the more frequent end of the range on both the baking soda and the vinegar. Once the weather turns drier in the fall and winter, you can usually ease back toward once a week without the smell creeping back. A few adjustments depending on the dog in front of you. For a puppy or any dog with skin that's already sensitive, test the baking soda on a small patch first and skip the vinegar rinse until you've checked with your vet, since young skin reacts differently than an adult dog's. For an older dog with thinner, more fragile skin, work the baking soda in more gently and shorten how long it sits before brushing out. If he won't hold still for any of this, don't fight him for the full routine on day one. Rub it into just the paws first while he's distracted with a treat, and build up to the rest of the coat over a few sessions once he's used to it. There are a few habits I see undo all of this without owners realizing it. The first is toweling him off after a walk in the rain or after swimming, but skipping the spaces between the paw pads and the folds of skin, which is exactly where moisture sits longest and yeast gets its best chance. Take an extra 30 seconds there specifically. The second is treating just the spot that smells worst and ignoring the rest of him, when usually the same imbalance is quietly starting in 2 or 3 other places at once: the other paw, the other ear, a fold you haven't checked. The third mistake is doing a routine for a week, seeing improvement, and stopping. This isn't a one-time fix. It's closer to brushing his teeth, something that needs to stay part of the routine, or the same imbalance creeps back in a month or two. And the fourth is reaching for a generic pet store deodorizing spray at the first sign of smell, before figuring out which of these it actually is. That spray might make the car ride home smell better, but it does nothing for the yeast, the gut, or the glands underneath it. And by the time you're back here searching for the real cause, the smell has usually gotten a head start. One more thing before you start. Don't do all 4 of these in the same week. The baking soda, the vinegar rinse, the probiotic, and the omega-3, all at once. A dog's stomach can react to too much changing at the same time with loose stool, even when every piece on its own is completely fine. Start with the baking soda rub this week. Add the probiotic next week. Bring in the omega-3 after that, watching how he does before adding the next piece. It's worth mentioning too that the gut and the skin stay connected the whole way through this. A gut that's out of balance often shows up as itchy skin and dull coat right alongside the smell, which is exactly why fixing the pipe, not just mopping up the puddle, tends to help more than just the odor. So the smell was never really about how often you wash him. It's the yeast on the skin, what's happening in his gut, his ears, or his anal glands, and each one has its own quick fix, along with its own line for when it's time to call the vet instead. Tonight, rub a little baking soda into his coat and pay attention to exactly where the smell is strongest. That tells you which piece to start with. Tell me below where it's strongest on your dog: paws, ears, or under the tail. If this helped you figure out what's actually going on, subscribing costs nothing, and it means this reaches another dog whose owner is still just reaching for more shampoo. Go give him a scratch behind the ears. He's probably already forgiven you for every bath he didn't ask for.